All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We just opened it up, so we'll start to see the attendee list filling up here, and we'll get going in just about a minute once people get set up and settled in. So thanks for joining us. So as we get started, first thing I want to check is audio and video. Can you hear me and can you hear Tim? Go ahead and put that in the chat box if you can.
Yeah, testing my audio here.
Awesome.
How are we doing, guys?
All right. Next thing I'd love to see in the chat is location and industry. This is always fun. It looks like we already got Milan, Italy. Very cool. London, Leaport, Pennsylvania, U.S. education, Indianapolis government, Scotland, Nashville, Tennessee, Abu Dhabi, Chattanooga. I can never keep up with these. Hampshire, England, Boise.
Yeah.
Salt Lake, California, Philippines, telecom, Stafford, UK, coaching, high hazard industries, Brazil, Winchester, UK. It's good.
Good.
We always get
global audience
in this. It's fun. Very cool. Tucson.
Fantastic.
We got a lot. This is good. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody again for joining us today as we do our third part in the psychological safety series. Today we're talking about stage 3 contributor safety. So if you haven't seen the other 2 webinars on inclusion safety and learner safety, you can find those on our YouTube channel. So just search Leader Factor on YouTube and you could pull up recordings of those if you didn't have a chance to attend them live. Today's session will be recorded as well. So as long as you're registered for today's webinar, which you did since you're here, you'll be receiving a link with the recording. So that will be made accessible to you. And then we also do want to give you a heads up. We have an upcoming webinar on challenger safety to conclude this series. And that's going to be, Tim, is that next week? I think you're muted. Tim, are you muted?
Yeah, we'll do stage 4 in a couple weeks.
Awesome. So we'll let you guys know. That'll probably be in conjunction with the recording. You'll get an invitation and we'll send email out to make sure that you'll have a chance to register for that. So with that, housekeeping items, let's go ahead and just go through a couple things in the chat. So when you have your chat open, you have an opportunity to send it to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. You want to make sure that you have all panelists and attendees checked if you want everyone to see your comments. If there's something logistical that you want to just talk to me about, I'll be monitoring the chat, and so you can do all panelists and I'll be able to see that. So we're going to be asking you a few questions today, and we'd like you to respond in the chat, so make sure you put all panelists and attendees. And last thing is we do have a giveaway at the end of the webinar, so if you stick around, we'll let you know what that is. It has to do with the book. So with that, we'll get going. Stage 3, contributor safety. We're really excited about this webinar today. So today, the webinar is hosted by Dr. Timothy Clark. He's an Oxford-trained social scientist and the author of the book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, which was published by Barrett Kohler earlier this year. If you haven't had a chance to read that, highly recommend it. Everything that we talk about today comes from this book. So Tim, the background on Tim, just a little bit. He's an Oxford-trained social scientist, as I mentioned. He's been doing research in the areas of emotional intelligence and psychological safety for a very long time, and has been doing instrument design for about 20 years. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but there's a survey that goes along with the 4 stages that you can run with your team that was designed by Tim. So one of the unique things about Tim, which I'm always excited about, is he has an academic background, but also a practitioner background, and he can straddle those 2 universes and help us understand the most up-to-date theory and research, but also how to apply that in the business world to get the best results. So with that, Dr. Clark, I'll turn it over to you to get us going.
Thanks, Junior. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. And I want to make this as an interactive experience, as rich and as interactive as we can make it. So I have four points on the agenda today. We're going to talk about stage 3 contributor safety within the context of the 4 stages framework. We're going to talk about the human need to matter. What does that mean? How is it fulfilled? We're going to talk about the coaching and accountability matrix, which is an applied tool that I will explain to you that you can use in your teams and your organizations. And then we will conclude by talking about a final framework that we call the 3 patterns of deflection. So let's begin by talking about stage 3 contributor safety. But first, let's give the context of the 4 stages of psychological safety framework. And let's begin with the basic definition of psychological safety. Psychological safety means that it's not expensive to be yourself. And when I say expensive, I mean socially, emotionally, politically, economically. It's not expensive to be yourself. If it's not expensive, you will be yourself. If it is expensive, you won't. You'll retreat, you'll curl up, you'll manage personal risk, which is a very natural thing to do because we are adaptable creatures. Now, let me go into a little bit more depth about what psychological safety, the definition of it and what it allows you to do. Psychological safety is not a binary proposition. It's not a matter of either having it or not having it. It's a matter of degree. And the degree of psychological safety that you have in a social unit allows you to do certain things. There's a natural progression in the way that the construct works. The first thing that we need to be able to do in a social unit is to be included. So that's number one. And you just watch people as they interact in social units, especially for the first time. It's very interesting. What's the first thing that we worry about when we go into a social unit? Do I fit in, right? That's the first thing that we worry about. Do I fit in? After that, we then need to be able to learn. So it's got to be safe to learn, to engage in the discovery process. And then third, stage 3 is to be able to contribute, to be able to make a difference, to be able to participate in the value creation process. And finally, stage 4 is to be able to feel safe enough to challenge the status quo. And you have to be able to do all of that without being embarrassed or marginalized or punished in some way. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more depth. So here's a graphic representation of the 4 stages. Psychological safety is a function of 2 things: respect, which you'll see on the vertical axis, and permission, which you'll see on the horizontal axis. It's the fusion of those 2 dimensions that produces a certain level of psychological safety. So today, we're going to focus on contributor safety, which is right here, and this is stage 3. Now, before we jump in to a little bit more depth here on stage 3, I want to review with you what we call the social exchanges. So here are the social exchanges for each of these stages. So let me go through. Let's start with stage 1, inclusion safety. The social exchange is that we trade inclusion. We exchange inclusion. We give inclusion to each other in exchange for 2 things. Number 1, we're human. And number 2, we do not present each other with harm. So if you're human and you're harmless, then we actually have a moral obligation to invite you into our society. And stage 1 truly is, it's a human right and it's a moral and ethical obligation. Now, the exchange in stage 2 for learner safety is that we give encouragement to learn in exchange for engagement to learn. So we encourage your learning, and in response to that, you engage in the learning. The institution, the organization, the social unit, the team is always the first mover, however, because if you're in a hostile learning environment and you sense that, then you're really not even going to engage in that learning process. So the social unit has to make the first move. Okay. Stage 3, contributor safety. Take a look at the social exchange. Take a look at the social exchange. It is autonomy with guidance in exchange for results. And this is what we're going to focus on today. We give people autonomy with guidance in exchange for results. And then challenger safety, which is stage 4, we're going to take this up in a couple of weeks. And the exchange is air cover in exchange for candor. But we're not going to go into that today. So we're going to focus back on stage 3, autonomy in exchange for guidance, or autonomy with guidance in exchange for results. So let's do a little deeper dive now into this stage. So let me begin by asking you a question. How do you give autonomy with guidance in exchange for results? This is the social exchange for this stage in this pandemic environment. So I'm asking this, I want to ask you this question. Go to your chat boxes and let's hear some perspective, some insights, some responses from you. We're in a very unique situation. I was just talking with a woman in Melbourne, Australia this week, and she said, oh, we've got to go back into a lockdown. So now we're in lockdown for 6 more weeks. And so we're not out of this pandemic, obviously, right? We have surges going on, and we've been in this mode for a while. How do you do this? How do you give autonomy with guidance in exchange for results? In the current environment, what are your thoughts about this? Junior, maybe help us out here.
So we've got working from home requires some autonomy, but leaders need to check in with their people to see how they're navigating. Don't micromanage your team. Ask questions instead of telling. Trust your employees to do their jobs at home and trust that they will do it. Use checklists, make help kits available, demonstrate trust, flexibility with regular check-ins. These are good. Collaboration and allow them to create their own timeline and deadlines, more frequent and intentional check-ins. The check-ins is a theme here. It seems to be a pattern that you guys are seeing, and we agree with you. Trust, accountability, communication, support, challenges, and praise. Trust. I'm seeing a lot of trust, a lot of frequent touch points.
Okay. Clear
guidance and what good looks like, little specificity. Supportive, not micromanaging. Okay, this is good.
So that's good. Now, here's an interesting thing about it. So we say we don't want to micromanage. Guess what? It's really hard to micromanage even if you want to in this environment. True. Why? Because there's a couple of shifts. If you're working in a virtual setting, there's a couple of shifts. You're going from synchronous work to asynchronous work. You're not co-located in the same physical location. You can't check up on people in the same way. So you've shifted from synchronous to asynchronous work, and you've shifted from standardization to personalization. So it's very difficult to micromanage people at the task level. And so based on the constraints that we're living under, we have to shift anyway, right? We have no choice but to shift. Now, the other pattern that many of you brought up is the pattern of communication. And this is actually a research finding that frequent, short patterns of interaction are far superior to infrequent, long patterns of communication. So are you doing this? Do you have frequent, short touch points? Are you checking in with your people? A rule of thumb that most organizations are finding that are working remotely is that you have at least 2 check-ins, 2 short touch points with a person per day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. So at least just 2 per day. And they can be very brief. They can be a few seconds. Of course, they could be longer, but it's that pattern of frequent and short that is far superior to infrequent and long. So keep that in mind. Now, we're learning our way through this. I guess the good news is that we're learning very fast. We are learning things very quickly that otherwise probably would have taken us years to learn. And then as we're doing this, what are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid boredom on one hand and burnout on the other. So there's this delicate balance, and it's very hard, particularly in a virtual environment. We're trying to stay in the middle, this zone of high engagement between boredom and burnout. And it's not an easy thing to do. Right, so let's go to module 2 and let's talk about the human need to matter. And I'm going to share with you a case study, and I'm going to share a personal experience that I have. So I'm going to get a little personal with this example. So in college, I played, I guess what we would call American football. So it's not, when I was going to school at Oxford in the UK, I said, yeah, I played football, and they thought I meant soccer. So I mean American football. So I played Division I football, and I want to tell you about an experience that I had. So I was a member of the team, and I was contributing to the team. And I had contributor safety. Contributor safety means that you feel safe to be a member of the team, to contribute, to make a difference, to participate in the value creation process. I was doing this, and I was feeling good about my participation, about my contribution on the team. And then guess what happened? I got hurt. I sustained a pretty serious injury. And as a result, I had one of the most interesting social experiences that I've ever had in my life. As soon as I got hurt, I came back. Well, I went to the hospital. I got treatment. I came back the next week. I could not participate with the team. I was injured. And I experienced a sudden and dramatic loss of contributor safety because I could no longer contribute. And by the way, it was also attached to inclusion safety. So my coach treated me as if I were invisible, as if I were not even a member of the team, because my worth to him was based on my worthiness as a player. And so therefore, when I got hurt, when I sustained that injury, I was no longer valuable to him. So there was this sudden and dramatic elimination of both contributor safety, but all the way down to inclusion safety. So the inclusion safety was gone. And it was a very stinging experience for me. And this is what I learned. I learned firsthand through my own experience what neuroscientists are now telling us. And here's what it is. Your brain processes social rejection in a way that is similar to physical pain, the neurological process. So you will experience social rejection oftentimes in a way that is very similar to the way that you experience physical pain. Isn't that incredible? And I experienced that firsthand. This was years ago, and yet I can still feel I still remember what that felt like. And I did process it in a way that was similar to physical pain. It was very painful, very, very painful experience. So I give you that as context and as a case study. Now, let me ask you a question related to this and perhaps experiences that you've had. Here's the question. How do you know that you matter in a social setting? What are the indicators that would tell you that you matter? So go to your chat box and let's see what kind of insight you have on this question. How do you know? We're always processing the environment. We're always doing threat detection. We're always looking for signs that we fit in, and then we can progress to learn and then to contribute. So how do you know? So Junior, a little help on this.
We've got people listen to you, eye contact when my input is solicited. People reach out to you and provide you with validation, eye contact again. People are interested in what you have to say, listen to. People greet you and introduce you by name.
Mm.
People seek your ideas. People look at you. Reaction from others, call you by your name. These are not complicated things, are they? People are
No.
engaging with you. Others showing attention and interest, eye contact, questions, listening, warmth, response to questions, smiling. I'm gonna scroll down a little farther in the chat. We got like 100 messages on that one.
Okay.
Of people are honest, they challenge appropriately, giving space for people to speak. You see a shift or change in others based on what you've contributed. People respond to you, active listening, acceptance. Others go quiet when you talk. So one of the things that's interesting to me is a lot of these things are things we learn in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Right? Listen, call people by their name, make eye contact. These aren't very difficult things, but a lot of us have problems with these.
Yeah. You know, it reminds me of one of the findings that came out of the MIT Human Dynamics Lab is that when you talk to someone, so think about this, when you're talking to someone, and I know it makes it a little bit difficult in a virtual environment, but when you talk to someone, you can do this. So I can say I'm working and I can look at them like this, but my body's facing this way, right? If I turn my entire body and I look at you straight away, there's a 30% increase in engagement levels. If I turn my body, because I'm communicating, I'm signaling to you that you have my full attention, versus my body is turned this way and I'm looking at you. I'm still looking at you and we're still conversing, but this is not the same as this. So think about how simple that is. That's a micro behavior, and yet the effect of that is profound in the way that we're able to connect and engage. So fantastic feedback. Let's keep going. So let me summarize how we create contributor safety. And by the way, if you have not downloaded our behavioral guide, please do that. It's a free resource, and it goes through all the behaviors and micro behaviors necessary in each of the stages. So how can I create contributor safety? Number one, explain the why. There's a statement that says the what informs and the why transforms. It's the why that taps motivation. It's the why that propels us to action. It's the why that sustains our attention. So we begin with that. Explain the why. Number two, assign the what. Assign the what. Let people figure it out as much as possible. So this is where we delegate. Or we assign that, we make the assignment, and then we delegate the how. So that becomes the third step. So number one, explain the why. Number two, assign the what, so the job to be done. And then three, delegate the how. As much as possible, this is where we are transferring that autonomy with guidance. Remember, that's the social exchange. Giving autonomy with guidance in exchange for what? Results. So we all have to deliver results. We're all accountable. But we want autonomy with guidance to come with that. So let's get a little bit more practical about how to do this, and let's talk about coaching and accountability. And I'm going to share with you a tool that we use with organizations really across the world. Let's begin by talking about the coaching part and then the accountability part. So let's think about coaching on a continuum that ranges from tell at one end to ask at the other. Now, if you're an effective leader, then you're obviously using the entire continuum. You need to use the entire continuum. But where is your focus? Where do you spend most of your time? Use your chat box and let's get some dialogue going here. If you're an effective leader, where do you spend most of your time on the coaching continuum, and why? What do you think? So we use the whole continuum, but we use different parts of it for different reasons. But where should we be spending most of our time?
Overwhelmingly ask.
Okay. Overwhelmingly ask. All right. So we've got that straight. Hopefully we all understand. that we need to be spending most of our time at the ask end. Here's the second question. Why? Why is it so important to spend most of our time at the ask end?
A couple of these comments have the why in them. I'll read one. So to allow the other person to grow and think.
Okay.
And so we talk a lot about this, about the transfer of ownership, right?
Yep.
And when we ask or solicit input from other people, we're transferring the burden of critical thinking to that person.
That's right.
So I like that response to foster autonomy. It helps them see their genius, facilitate
Right.
problem solving, and develop self-awareness. Okay.
So I love that. It helps people see their genius.
Yeah.
You cannot provide the maximum amount of guided autonomy unless you're using an inquiry-based coaching model. Right? Okay, now here's a related question. What is the danger of staying at the tail end of the coaching continuum? What's the danger? What happens if we are spending too much time at the tail end of the coaching continuum?
Dependence, no buy-in, no growth in the capability of others. People don't think for themselves.
Right.
Micromanagement, loss of trust. This is good.
The consequences are very far-reaching. They're very far-reaching.
And
so
there's another comment here that I want to point out. So yeah. Georgia says, it's somewhat dependent on context. In crisis, asking can be most unhelpful. And I wonder how many orgs still currently feel like they're in crisis.
That's a good point.
That's a really good point.
Right.
It is context dependent. And the macro level environment can certainly determine, at least in the short term, where we're going to err, right? Sometimes tell certainly has advantages for speed and clarity, right?
Yep. It does have advantages for speed and clarity. So when the stakes are high and the margin of error is low, you've got to move to the tail end. So when you have an emergency, you've got to move to the tail end. When you have someone that truly is at the very beginning, the very first learning stage, we've got to spend more time at the tail end, right? So it becomes a little more didactic for a little longer. We have to bring them up. We have to train them up. But then we're trying to shift to the ask end as much as we can. I'll just summarize and say that as psychologists have discovered over and over and over again, if you spend too much time at the tail end, you breed dependency and learned helplessness, and you actually decelerate. You become a barrier to the learning, growth, and development of your people. And so we've got to be very conscious and self-aware of the way that we are coaching people.
Tim, the last comment that I want to bring up here is a good one. It's asking shouldn't be about dumping responsibility. I really like that. When we talk about transferring the burden of critical thinking and transferring ownership, we're not relinquishing all of our responsibility or our input or our collaboration. It is still an active collaboration and teamwork. And so I think that's a great comment. Just wanted to point that out.
It is. And that would be the pattern of an absentee landlord that is asking and really over delegating and really not taking responsibility. And so can you go too far that direction? Sure you can. And it's going to be destructive at the extreme if you're doing it that way. So that's a very good insight. Thank you for sharing that. So we create, as it shows, dependency and learned helplessness if we spend too much time at the tail end. Let's talk about accountability. So we talked about coaching. Now let's talk about accountability on its own continuum. And here's what that looks like. At the very bottom of this continuum, and we're going to show it vertically, we have task level accountability. If you think about everything we do, a task is a basic unit of work. We take everything that we do and we break it up and we say, you do this and you do this and you do that and I'll do this. So it's a divisible basic unit of work. Then we put tasks together. And when we put them into a repeating sequence, we call that a process. And then when we put a cluster of tasks together that has a beginning and an end, We call that a project. So process and project level accountability, that's level 2. Then we can go all the way up to outcome accountability. Outcome accountability means that when we delegate, our terms of engagement are a little bit different now. We're not going to talk so much about tasks and process and project because you have a demonstrated track record of being able to perform at the outcome level. So we're mainly going to talk about outcomes. And so then I, as a coach, I'm going to come down and talk to you about process or project or tasks only as needed, by exception. But I'm going to try and keep our discussion up. So now let me ask you a question based on this. So we have these 3 levels of accountability. Number 1, task. Number 2, process, project. Number 3, outcome. If you go to most people and you ask them, at what level of accountability would you like to be managed? Would you like to be led? Would you like to be coached? What do most people say? They say outcome level. Why? Why is that the preference of most people? Now, there are exceptions here and there, but why? Why does most of the human species, why do we want to be coached at the outcome level of accountability? What do we got, Junior?
You have freedom, autonomy, make a difference. This meets a need for autonomy, most freedom.
Yeah.
Demonstrates trust because we think we're all competent.
Okay.
Feel valued, maximal choice.
Okay, beautiful comments. Outcome accountability is naturally attractive to most human beings because it transfers ownership to the individual. And when we transfer ownership, that's where the magic happens. That's where we do our best work. That's where we have peak engagement experiences. That's where we have career best experiences. And so therefore, there's this natural desire and aspiration to get to that place. We want to get to that place. Now, some people don't want to hold themselves accountable, and that becomes a performance issue. But by and large, most people want to get to outcome-based accountability. So now we've talked about coaching on one side and accountability on the other. So here's a summary. So when you coach others, there are 2 primary things that you're trying to do. Number 1, you're trying to transfer critical thinking, the burden, the responsibility, the work of critical thinking. How do we do that? We do it primarily by moving from the tell to the ask end of the coaching continuum. That's how we transfer critical thinking. Number 2, in coaching, we're trying to transfer ownership through accountability. How do we do that? We do that by moving up the layers or the levels of accountability from task level to process, project, and finally to outcome. So if we can do those 2 things in coaching, that is how we become scalable as leaders, number 1. And number 2, that is how we accelerate the development of our people. So let's put this together in a tool that we use that we call the coaching and accountability matrix. Now, what you'll notice is that on the horizontal axis, we have the coaching continuum that runs from tell to tell ask in the middle to ask on the right side. And then on the vertical axis, we have the accountability continuum that ranges from task, level 1, to process, level 2, to outcome, level 3. This becomes a very powerful diagnostic tool. So as a leader, as a coach, as a manager, as a teacher, as a parent, whatever your stewardship is, you can look at the people for whom you have responsibility, and you can assess their mode of performance based on these 2 dimensions. So you simply ask the question. So number 1, at what level of accountability does this individual currently perform? And you can go from task to process to outcome. Question number 2, where on the coaching continuum can I coach this person based on their demonstrated performance today? How far to the ask end of the continuum can I get? So you rate them on those 2 questions, and then you can plot them on the 9-box matrix. Now, what's the goal? We're trying to get people up and to the right. So this is a very practical tool that we use with organizations really across the world. It's universal, and it's a powerful diagnostic. If you're a team leader and say you have 5 direct reports, then you do an analysis for each individual and you actually plot them. And then that becomes a baseline for you to ask the next question, which is, what is the next step for this individual? How can I help develop them to a higher level of accountability and to a coaching mode where I'm transferring critical thinking to them and I'm able to coach them through inquiry rather than a didactic model of telling, right? So I hope that this will be helpful to you as a diagnostic tool. All right, questions or comments on that? Now, here's the other thing that I'll say. In coaching, we often get in the way as coaches, don't we? We derail the process. So what are the most common patterns of derailing the coaching process? So the coach isn't all, I mean, coaching is an incredibly important skill, but it's a skill that requires a lot of practice. And it's not something that most leaders naturally do well at the beginning. It takes time and a lot of deliberate effort. But what are some coaching derailers that we see, that you see on a frequent basis? Go ahead and write those in the chat box.
And while those are coming in, I want to mention just a few of the comments that I really like.
Yeah.
So Tilda asked, what happens when your mentees plot your coaching style? Wouldn't that be important info as well for you as a leader? I think that's a fantastic idea.
Oh, yeah.
It would be very interesting. We all have our own perception of where we might fall, and others may have something different. And Helen's comment, and the first box low and to the left, is for small kids in danger situations.
That's very good.
I think that's
all kids in dangerous situations. That's absolutely true. Yep.
So for derailers, I'll get to a few of these. So coach as the all-knowing, talking too much, telling them what to do, not listening, lack of engagement by the sponsors. That's a big one I see a lot.
Yeah.
When triggered by someone's response, falling into judgment, inconsistent messages, not active listening, too much tell, not enough delegation, offering solutions instead of allowing the coachee to reach their own. That's a great one. See that all the time.
Yeah.
Thinking you need to have all the answers. Another great one. Pretend coaching when I really want to tell.
That's right. Now, what, by the way, that's a great one. So I'm pretending, right, to use the inquiry-based model, but I really want to tell. What happens in that situation? Well, people get it, right? It's not lost on them. You can't really hide your intent very well. And so it comes out. So there's got to be the intent behind the skill.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'll just show you a few that we run into a lot. They're common, right? Adding too much value. How often do you see that? Always giving your 2 cents. Always have to have the last word. That's incredibly paternalistic. And so a lot of times the best thing that you can do is just shut up, and you'll do yourself a big favor. Giving your opinion too early. I got to tell you this experience that I had. I was in San Francisco with a tech company. We'd been working with a team on a big project for 6 months. The team came in to present to the CEO its findings and recommendations after 6 months of very difficult work. And this was a global team. We had people around the world, different time zones. They were working together. They'd worked so hard. They did their presentation, and they were very proud of the work that they had done. and they had presented to the executive team. And so now it was time for questions and answers. What do you think the CEO did? He didn't wait, but he jumped right in and he gave his opinion first. He gave his opinion first. What do you think that did to the team? It preempted everything. No one else said a word after he weighed in right after the presentation. So the session was over. It was over after 5 minutes of Q&A. As soon as the CEO was done, we were done. And I still remember walking out of the conference room with the team into an adjoining room and just being a grief counselor for the next hour because the team was so devastated. So what did we have? We had a CEO who was culturally tone deaf, who didn't understand interpersonal dynamics, didn't understand how to engage people, didn't understand how to handle this situation. He weighs in early, first, it was over. So that's just an example of a derailer that had a profoundly adverse effect on a team in a very high stakes situation. And there are many examples, and I won't slog through all of these, but these are some common ones that we see over and over again. Okay, one more tool for this webinar. We're going to talk about patterns of deflection. Patterns of deflection. There are 3 primary patterns of deflection that human beings use. Number 1, denial. Number 2, blame. And number 3, excuse. Why do we use patterns of deflection? What do you think? Go ahead and type in a response into the chat box. So humans take patterns of deflection to an art form. We're very good at it. We're very practiced at it. And by the way, we've all used all 3 patterns. We all have. I have, you have, we all have. And we're trying to disabuse ourselves of these patterns because they're not healthy and they're not helpful to us or anyone else. But we run into these all the time. If you've ever coached anyone, right? So if a human being does not want to take accountability for his or her behavior, for his or her decisions, for his or her performance, then chances are that the individual will engage in some pattern or pattern, some combination maybe, of these patterns of deflection. What do we got, Junior?
So some of the reasons: we don't feel safe to fail. We don't want responsibility. We're trying to protect ourselves and our egos. Rationalization: we don't want to admit we made a mistake. Projection is easier than examination of painful emotions. They're not
Very
knowledgeable
good
in the
comment,
area.
by the way.
Avoid responsibility. So a lot of self-protection and a lot of responsibility avoidance.
Yes,
So those are kind of the trends that I'm seeing here.
that's right.
Avoiding conflict. Don't like being wrong. Don't know how to deal with conflict. Vulnerability. To feel better about ourselves. Avoid being the target of blame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So again, for those of you who act as coaches, who train coaches, who are responsible for the development of your human capital, this is another powerful diagnostic tool that you can use. And so the coach's responsibility is to be able to identify signs of deflection and then address those. So let's put it this way. Good coaches are always watching for signs of deflection. So what do you do when the individual you're coaching engages in deflection? What do you do? So that's my next question for you. What do you think? What do you do? You've identified deflection, and it came in the form of denial or blame or excuse, or maybe a combination. So now what? What do you do?
Repeat what they say back. So some mirroring.
Okay.
Notice and offer the observation. You could confront them by pointing it out. Ask if you can share an observation. Name it with compassion and curiosity. drill down to
Okay,
unpack
I love that.
why.
I love the way you said that.
Ask them to explain what they mean. Ask how they feel. Redirect them and tell them what you noticed. Facilitate reflection. Enable them to understand that they're deflecting. Notice what happened. Gently mirror it and ask a question. Good. Explore. Redirect to solution-focused conversation. Ask why. Tell me more. Decrease the threat level. It's good.
So what's the tricky part here? The tricky part is that you've got to you've got to have some candor, right? So that you can make progress. If you start to see evidence of deflection and you're trying to de-escalate emotion at the same time, or at least prevent it from escalating. So these are the moments of truth in coaching. And this is where the skill and the will really are demonstrated. This is where you demonstrate your value as a coach. When you start to see these patterns of deflection, you can see them. Okay, what's the next step? How can I handle this? And I loved, I don't know who made the statement, to respond then with curiosity and compassion. This is not an easy thing to do, but this is where we really win or lose in that coaching engagement, isn't it? Okay, let's summarize, and I'm going to summarize contributor safety stage 3 with a couple of statements. Number 1, human beings have an innate need to use their knowledge, skills, and experience to contribute and make a difference. When we learn, right, stage 2 is learner safety. We learn, we acquire skills, experience, knowledge. What's the next stage of natural human need? I want to go use it. I want to apply it. I want to make a difference. I want to contribute. That's what we do. Number 2, when individuals contribute in a meaningful way, they develop self-efficacy, self-worth, and the capacity of independent high performance. And think about the current context. With this pandemic, that's exactly what we need of our people. We need them to demonstrate independent high performance, because we're not there in a bathrobe with a flashlight looking over their shoulder. We can't do that. We can't even manage them at task level accountability in many cases anymore because we are remote, we're distributed. And therefore we have to move to an outcome-based model of interaction and coaching and development. So I hope that resonates with you. So with that, Junior, I'll turn it over to you to communicate what's coming up, and then let's do a little Q&A.
That sounds great. So a couple things that we want to make you aware of. The first of which, I guess, is the giveaway that I mentioned at the beginning. So we have some instructions here that I will post in the chat, but if you do not have a copy of the book, we would like to give you one. So we're going to ask you to, on LinkedIn, post your experience about today's webinar, tag Tim and tag Leader Factor, and include the hashtag psychological safety. So we've got 20 digital copies of the book to give away. We'll do the first 20, and I will go ahead and throw these instructions in the chat right now. The next thing we want to do is tell you about a few things that we have coming up, okay? So July 24th at 12 Eastern, we've got the Stage 4 webinar. So Stage 4 is Challenger Safety. It's the culminating stage of the 4 stages of psychological safety, and it'll be a great webinar. So we'll get that invitation sent out. And then we have a few certifications. We have a certification scheduled for the 23rd, which is sold out. That went pretty quick. We've scheduled another one for the 21st of August. Now, this certification is a 2-hour live virtual certification facilitated by Dr. Clark, in which we do a deep dive on the 4 stages of psychological safety and their application to teams. And we also do a technology certification using the 4 stages of psychological safety team survey platform. So that's a platform that we use to measure the psychological safety of a team or group. It's a 12-item survey with a few open-ended questions, and then all of the data is aggregated onto a dashboard in which we give managers and leaders practical recommendations to improve the psychological safety of the team. You can see trending data over time, a lot of really cool things. And we're going to do a webinar on that platform specifically in the near future. Don't have a date for that one, but we think that that would probably be a valuable topic. And then we have a virtual workshop coming up. So not a certification, but a workshop. This is for managers, coaches, consultants, anyone in those roles. And it's 4 stages of psychological safety. Again, 2-hour live virtual workshop. And that gives you access to run the 4 stages team survey with your team twice. You can run it once at the beginning to get a baseline, get your recommendations, go and implement them, and then run it again to see if you've been able to make some gains. So that's July 31st. After this webinar, we'll send you links to all of these things. So we try to keep the audience, the participant count pretty low so that we can all participate. So all of the participants in those sessions are on video and audio so that we can interact in a pretty personal way and people can ask questions. This is just a screenshot of a piece of the dashboard of the 4 stages team survey platform. So you can see what some of those things look like. So I know it's really difficult to see, but you can see an overall score, score by stage, rank ordered items, filterable by stage, top 3 opportunities, results over time. And then in addition to that, we have verbatim comments. We have the behavioral guide in a digital format, and a few other things on that platform. So those are the things that we wanted to let you know about. Another thing that I would love to ask is if you're enjoying the content that we're putting out on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, these webinars, if you follow us on those social platforms, go ahead and give us a follow or a subscription on YouTube. Those things help us out very much to get this content out to a broader audience. So we appreciate very much your engagement and your participation in everything that we're doing. We've had great reception for all of the stuff on the 4 stages that we're doing, and we'll continue to put out great content and really appreciate your participation. So with that, Tim, anything else?
Just, we've got Q&A time. We've got 8 minutes.
Let's do it. So
Yep.
if you guys have any questions that you would like to ask us, go ahead and throw those in the chat. So the first question from Roger, does recognition as a form of reward play a part in contributor safety, feeling that your effort and results are valued?
Absolutely, no question. But let me reflect the question back to you, Roger, and to everybody who's joining us. What kind of recognition is the most valuable kind? What characteristics need to be part of that recognition? There's good recognition, there's helpful recognition, there's constructive recognition, but there's unhelpful recognition as well. It doesn't get the job done. So what kind of recognition really is rocket fuel to people? What would you say? Okay, what do we got, Junior?
We've got being heard and seen, strength, focus, recognition has to be precise, citing the actual behavior or result obtained, customized to how people want to be recognized, one that identifies what the contributions were and the impact, personalized. We got a lot of personalization comments that I think are relevant.
Yeah. So just these basic characteristics, it's got to be timely. It needs to be specific. It needs to be given in a way that the person can appreciate, so that you're reflecting an appreciation and an understanding for the disposition and temperament of that person. These are all things that need to be taken into consideration. Great question.
Next up, can a toxic work environment ever become psychologically safe?
It can, but here's the key. It's the head of the snake theory. This is what we call the culture formation hypothesis. Here's what we know based on research. The single most important factor in culture formation is what? It's the modeling behavior of the leader. The modeling behavior of the leader has more influence in defining and reinforcing the prevailing norms for a team than any other factor. So if you have a toxic leader that is primarily responsible for the prevailing norms of a team, there's very little chance that you can remove that toxic environment or transform that toxic environment. But if the leader is willing to change, or you replace the leader, then you can transform a toxic team. But those are two requirements. In the research literature, we call it generational replacement. We need either a new leader, or we need a leader that is willing to change in a pretty dramatic way. But those are the two requirements. Otherwise, we can make incremental changes. We can kind of tinker at the margins, but we're not going to have the fundamental change that we need. So it's a fantastic question.
So another question that I like, and we talk about this quite a bit, is let's say I'm not the manager and I don't have direct influence over the manager.
Yeah.
If I'm an individual contributor on a team, what can I do to improve the psychological safety of the team? That kind of gets at the heart of a few of these questions I'm seeing in here.
Yeah, it really does. Every member of the team exerts influence on the prevailing norms of the team and on the level of psychological safety, because psychological safety, let's remember, is dynamic and it's delicate. The job is never done. It's a perishable thing. The job is never done. So it requires constant modeling, constant reinforcement. Every member of the team contributes to that. So if you're an individual contributor, you have a vital role to play on that team, even though you're not the leader. So don't minimize the influence and the impact that you have.
Okay. Let's see if I can find another one. Any interesting books that you've been reading lately?
Oh, I get this a lot, right?
I know.
I know.
I'll give you one.
Okay.
I just read So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport.
Yeah.
I thought that was a fantastic read. The idea that skill trumps a lot of everything else, and that you can't be marginally better in an area. It often requires you to be significantly better to be able to make a difference.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so any more questions?
Are there national cultures where gaining psychological safety across the team is more difficult than in others? So does the macro level environment affect psychological safety, I guess?
It does. There are cultural legacies that exist at the national and subnational level. I probably won't mention some, but where you have a hierarchical tradition that lingers in the prevailing culture of society, and it can be difficult to overcome that. In fact, that's one of the exact themes that I tackled in my dissertation at Oxford. And so that is true, but I'll give you an example. For 4 years in my career, when I was running a consulting firm based in Boston, I reported directly to Tokyo. And I had a Japanese boss. And as I was coming into this relationship with my new boss, I was worried. And I thought, oh, I think he's going to fire me because I feel that it's important to give my input, and I like to collaborate, and I like to be candid with compassion. And I had been told that it's rigidly hierarchical and that challenging the status quo was not appreciated. Guess what I found? I found the exact opposite in this boss. He was incredibly solicitous of my input, of my feedback, of my candor, And we had this marvelous working relationship for that period. So I hesitate to identify any cultural fault lines. There are differences, but universally, I find that leaders have the ability and the desire to create psychological safety in their organizations and on their teams, but they need help. They need tools, they need measurement, and they need behaviors. And if they get the proper help, they can make step change improvements in performance. So I would leave you with that thought.
Excellent. Well, we are at the hour. There are a few more questions that we won't be able to get to today, hopefully next time. But thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned for the post-webinar email where we'll give you some links to the content that we talked about, the workshop registrations and some things of that nature. So the recording will also go out probably in the next couple days. Keep an eye out for that. Remember the book giveaway, and if you want to follow us and subscribe to our YouTube, that would be greatly appreciated. So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.